Oh, hey, what are you listening to? Shh. Ah. The sound of silence. You're not listening to anything, are you? I'll pose a question. If you had a budget of $500, would you buy one set of $500 headphones, or would you consider buying two $250 headphones? I would advise that if you really knew how a headphone sounded, and I'll get to this later, then sure, go ahead and get the $500 one. But I'd much rather have two sets of different headphones instead of having one singular $500 headphones. There are a number of reasons for this, but I'll state two. Just like your ear will tune out that air conditioning hum after a few minutes, your brain is very good at filtering out repetitive sounds. Especially during critical listening, it's easy to hear certain parts of the mix but ignore the rest. You start to overcompress and over-EQ. We've all done this. The brain does this visually too. You can have 100 people on set but still miss that Starbucks coffee cup on the set of Game of Thrones, for example. So it's always good to have another pair to listen to, something entirely different perhaps. You can certainly go out and check your mix in your car, so this is just more or less to prove a point. For me, I have these AKG K702s. I will often switch between my Sennheisers and these AKGs just to refresh my ears. I don't want to come across too preachy or think that I have some authority to tell you guys what to do. But too often, myself included, we rush to judgments without proper data points or comparative analysis. And I think this is especially important in music and audio where it can quickly become highly subjective. What is good or what is better? This is super hard to convey sometimes. But what I can try to do is train my ears to hear the differences. So coming back to these headphones, the Sennheisers and the AKGs, instead of talking about what's good or better, let's talk about their differences. I was listening to the soundtrack for La La Land, and I can tell you that the AKG K702s sounded slightly wider in terms of its stereo width than the Sennheisers. Emma Stone's voice had a bit more sibilance and presence. You could argue that it had more clarity, but you could also argue that the AKGs were a bit brighter than the Sennheisers in the vocal range, maybe even slightly hyped. The Sennheisers were slightly narrower in stereo width, but more balanced, more coherent, more under control compared to the AKGs. Emma's voice was warmer and more pleasant, but it wasn't dull. If anything, it was clear but not too bright. Neither were bassy, which is fine by me. From my experience, bass response in headphones, to do it right, is a very hard thing to do without muddying up the mids and low mids, which for me is super important for overall understanding and enjoyment of the mix. But I say the AKGs are slightly bit more bass punchier than the Sennheisers. The point is that by listening to two or more headphones, I'm listening to hear the differences, thus really training my ears to hear better. Once I have a better understanding of the headphone performance profile from me, I can choose the one I like and avoid the ones that I don't. I just don't think we do this often as we should as music lovers and music makers. And in this case, if we do train our ears to listen more critically, we can suss out the posers and the snake oilers, but instead we can really support those companies who really care about making great music. So for me, audiophile headphones under $500, I would have to go with the Sennheiser 650s. In fact, if you could just have one pair of headphones, these may be it. Comfortable, balanced, and trustworthy. meaning the sonic signature either on the high end or the low end are not overly hyped. It's the kind of headphones if your friends or family have never had a good pair of headphones, maybe they've had earbuds or consumer-grade Bluetooth headphones all their lives, these Sennheisers should sufficiently impress them. It's perfect for the kind of music I love to listen to, which tends to be more orchestral, acoustical, jazz, but it's great also for electronic music and other beat-oriented types of genres because the low end isn't so overly hyped. It's got a lot of definition in the low-mid range. For tracking, recording, and sometimes mixing, I recommend the AKG K702s. These are the 65th anniversary edition, but the regular K702 should be sufficiently similar. I grew up with the AKG K240s ever since college, and a lot of my music and recording sessions had these AKGs as my go-to cans, and the K702s are sort of the upgraded version of those K240s. So I know these headphones and I know them well. So in many ways, I'm not hard recommending the AKG per se, other than really get to know the characteristics of your headphones. Listen to albums you love and compare them to your car speakers and your AirPods or your loudspeakers and see how each of them compare. When you really know your headphones, you can just focus on decision making about your music. There are many great headphones under this price range, but I'm going to recommend two that I personally love. Audeze LCD3s could be described as one of the most visceral and gut-punching type of headphones out there today. LCD3s are something of an experience. It's not a pair you can just listen to chilled and laid back. It commands your attention and you better be sitting up, maybe even standing. One thing I will say is that these don't have much of a soundstage to speak of, especially when you compare it to the HD800s. It's also quite heavy, and after a while it can be a little uncomfortable, especially compared to the Sennheisers, which simply disappears. Nevertheless, the LCD3 is an absolute beast. It's fat, it's warm, it's gutsy. If you listen to any classic rock or jazz, these will absolutely knock your socks off. If the Audeze LCD3 is the supercharged muscle car Cobra, well then I have to say the Sennheiser HD800Ss are the German-engineered, sophisticated, AMG-tuned Mercedes. The stereo imaging and the soundstage is huge, especially when it compares to the Audeze LCD3s. There are times where I forget that I'm wearing them, and that is not an exaggeration. It's also very tonally accurate and trustworthy. Sure, it doesn't have the bass response like the LCD3s, but there's enough there for you to make correct decisions. It is supremely comfortable for long mix sessions, and it translates very well. Is it slightly trebly? Yeah, but it's not harsh. And can it use a little more bass punch? Well, especially compared to the Audeze LCD3, yeah, but there's a lot of clarity in the low mids and the mids, again, for you to make plenty good decisions. The Sennheiser HD800s, I think, is a masterpiece of audio engineering, and it's worth a listen. At this point, I've owned and sold a lot of headphones in my days. I try to at least own one type of headphone in each category so that I can have a broad understanding of the market and technology, and because I'm a big nerd. So at $3,000 and up, these Meze Empyreans are what's called endgame headphones. Anything beyond this, you're starting to hit that point of diminishing returns, in my opinion. Beyond this price point, you're looking for more exotic materials, experimental technologies, and build quality, look and feel as much as performance. You're also going to take a hard look at other aspects of your signal chain, like your headphone preamps, your DAC, your cables even, and your sound source especially itself, to make sure that there aren't any weak links in your audio signal chain. So compared to the Sennheiser HD800Ss, the Meze Empyreans noticeably sound more rounded off and warmer, but no less clear in the treble range. But it's the bass response where the Meze really shines. I'm very sensitive to bass response only because most headphones with earth-shattering bass tend to make a lot of the music I love just muddy. I think a lot of times this bass boost is done at the sacrifice of mids and low mids, where so much of the detail lies. But the Meze does not compromise. Not only does it have a massively powerful bass, it's got clarity in the low mids and the mids, which is quite impressive for an open-backed headphones. I think the Sennheiser still edges the Meze Empyreans out in terms of soundstage, but not by much. I also took the Meze to A/B test some of my high-end digital to analog converters I own, and you can start to really hear the differences in the DAC performances. The Meze is sufficiently high resolving enough where now it can be a sort of a measuring stick to your other high-end gear. Audio is psychoacoustic in nature, meaning we all perceive sound slightly different from one another. But our ears can be trained much like any other muscle. Some of us are just starting out and others are Olympians. So in conclusion, what's helped me over the years is not about the fancy headphones or gear, but my willingness to listen, to compare, train, and educate my ears.